South Carolina's women's basketball program has contacted another center in the transfer portal, one that could be a better fit than some Gamecock fans might initially think.
You are Locked On Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Gamecock Nation, and welcome back to the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. I'm Andrew Lyon, the host of this podcast, and also a staff writer for Gamecock Digest over on Fan Nation. Thank y'all so much for making the Locked On Gamecocks podcast your first listen or watch for your team here today. We are free and available both on YouTube and wherever you get your audio podcasts daily. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it myself, I have a competitive side, and it is a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. The offseason continues for Staley and South Carolina's women's basketball program, and as we've talked about before on this show, there obviously aren't many question marks for this team heading into next season, coming off of an undefeated national title run. But there is one question the program does have to answer. It is essentially who is going to replace Kamilla Cardoso at the center spot. We've talked about the options that may already exist on the roster previously on the show, talked about Sania Feagin, talked about maybe an Adhel Tac if she comes back strong from the injuries that she has suffered in recent years. And some people have even brought up maybe Ashlyn Watkins could be someone that fulfills that role. And then there was Stanford's Kiki Ariafin, and I'm sorry if I butchered the last name, but she was also an option potentially this past week, and she wound up going to Southern Cal on the West Coast. So South Carolina continues to sort of look around and see what their options are. And there's another option that has apparently presented itself in the transfer portal, as it has been reported by Skim Mulkey on X. Yes, that's the actual account name. And this was the first account that brought up Kiki from Stanford possibly going to South Carolina on a visit. So this account is legit just based off of that one story. But this account reported the other day that Arkansas transfer Maryam Dauda has heard from over 20 programs, including powerhouse programs like UConn, South Carolina, Texas, and Stanford. And apparently, according to Skim Mulkey as well, she's in the process of narrowing it down and setting up some visits. I think that when you look at Maryam Dauda and the skill set that she has presented at Arkansas, she could be the answer for South Carolina at the center position. When you look at her college resume, the first thing that jumps out is the fact that she actually has a plethora of starting experience in the SEC. If there's one thing that Sania Feagin, Ashlyn Watkins, and obviously an Adhel Tac would lack if they were the starting center, it is starting experience. But Dauda does not lack that. She started all 33 games for Arkansas in the 2023-24 season. Granted, this is the only year that she has starting experience, but she's at least played against a bunch of different SEC teams. She also understands what it's like to go through a total slate in this conference as a starter, which is also something that we should not overlook as well. Another thing that stood out about her career at Arkansas, this is somebody that can protect the rim. She can protect the paint on the same level as an Ashlyn Watkins and a Kamilla Cardoso. This past basketball season, Maryam blocked 74 shots, averaging 2.24 blocks per game. She ranked third in the SEC in blocks, behind just Kamilla Cardoso and Ashlyn Watkins. So behind what South Carolina was trotting out on the floor, Maryam Dauda was the next best shot blocker in this league. I don't think that should be overlooked. I think, as a matter of fact, it's a big reason why South Carolina, which obviously, although they are a much better offensive team now, they still hang their hat on what they've been able to do defensively for several years under Dawn Staley. This is something that you should look at. Can you imagine her being paired up with Ashlyn Watkins in that front court, or even if Sania Feagin was starting, that would be pretty dangerous still for opposing teams to go up against. And here's the last component of Dauda's career that I think could help South Carolina in their continued offensive evolution that they've undergone over the past year or so. She can stretch the floor from the front court. She did not shoot the ball very, very well, I should say, from three-point range in her redshirt freshman season at Arkansas. I believe she was 6 of 24 from the field from behind the arc, so exactly 25%. This past season, however, the volume was higher and the efficiency was a lot better. She was 29 of 91, or 31.9% from three-point range this past season. And when you look at South Carolina's front court, as good as it is in terms of the depth, the athleticism, obviously the defensive ability, the ability to attack the offensive glass, and stretch the floor out to, say, the mid-range area, if you look at, say, a Chloe Kitts, eventually a Joyce Edwards, and even a Feagin and Ashlyn Watkins, this team doesn't really have a front court player that shoots the ball from deep at that kind of clip. Chloe Kitts might be able to do that, but at least for right now, we haven't seen that a whole lot since she has been playing the 4 spot this past offseason. So if Maryam Dauda ends up coming to South Carolina, she could end up adding to this offense. She could end up being used on a bunch of slip screens at the top of the key. Think about, say, a BJ Mack from South Carolina's men's basketball team. Can play the 5, but also can go out and stretch the floor, which puts the defense in even more conflict than it's already in. And you pair that up with the athleticism, again, and the depth that this team currently has, it'll just make defending South Carolina even more difficult if they have that, of all places, at their center position. So, although she might not jump off the page immediately, maybe not like a Kiki from Stanford, I think that Maryam Dauda could indeed be a viable solution for South Carolina at that center position. So keep an eye out on that transfer portal recruitment moving forward. And I don't know what it would mean if she is an intra-conference transfer. Obviously, there's different rules in other sports, so we'll see how that could affect things as well. Now, while the women's basketball program continues to look for a solution at the center position, South Carolina's football program, they may have found some solutions to their lack of downfield threats in their wide receiver room as they landed 2 solid commitments on Tuesday. We'll talk about each of those guys in a few moments right here on Locked On Gamecocks. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. The 76ers Knicks series has been quite hotly contested to this point. They're going to Game 6, which will take place in Philadelphia on Thursday night. We've already had 1 overtime game in this series, and the odds for there to be 2 overtime games or more in this series has been set at plus 750 by FanDuel odds makers. So if they go to overtime in Game 6, you put money on that prop bet, that is going to be a huge win for you right there. So I would strongly suggest that you go and take a look at that before that game begins again on Thursday night. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every playoff shot count with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, where we cover your South Carolina Gamecocks every single day. And as always, a big thank you to each and one of you everydayers who make the Locked On Gamecocks podcast your daily choice for South Carolina Gamecocks sports coverage. All right, let's talk about a couple of these wide receiver additions that Shane Beamer and South Carolina's football program have made in the past 24 hours. And let's start off with, in my opinion, the more notable addition of the two, as South Carolina last night landed Dalevon Campbell from the Nevada Wolfpack. Dalevon was in the transfer portal, obviously, for the past week or two. He was the leading receiver for the Wolfpack in the 2023 season. I believe 31 catches, over 500 receiving yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns. For a Nevada squad that, you look at the team, it was not all that good. I believe that they went 2-10 in 2023. Doesn't mean that they don't have good players. I think Dalevon, obviously, is an exception there. But yeah, he had to be pretty much the guy for a team that was not all that great. And it's kind of similar to Xavier Legette and what he had to endure with South Carolina back in the 2023 season. But let's talk about Campbell and what he could bring to this team. The thing that initially stands out is this kid stands at 6'4", based on the roster numbers that Nevada had from last year's football team. That's obviously a big deal. When you look at the roster right now, out of all the wide receivers South Carolina has, they only have 2 guys, including Campbell. They're listed as taller than 6'2". Campbell, again, is listed at 6'4", and Nick Harbor is listed at 6'5". That's all they've got. And I understand you don't necessarily need to have just a super tall wide receiver to have necessarily a downfield threat. Xavier Legette kind of showed that this past season, being listed at 6'1" from the NFL draft measurables and also the recent Senior Bowl measurables that they took, but still being a jump ball, contested catch kind of wideout. Dalevon Campbell, I'm thinking of Dalvin Cook with that. He is going to be a jump ball threat in this offense. He can make contested downfield catches. He can win hand fights. He can go up for a jump ball where his defender also has as good of a chance to make a play on it and come down with the reception. He also has the long stride speed to beat his man, even if he's lined up off the line of scrimmage. So my point here is this. Dalevon Campbell, he is not just some slow, tall, lanky wide receiver that basically won't be a factor in the intermediate passing game and is basically just going to be your jump ball guy all day long. Now, compared to everybody else in the wide receiver room, again, he's probably going to be your guy. So I'm not going to say this is one of the best pickups nationally speaking for this offseason, but in terms of needs, this was a huge addition for South Carolina to get Dalevon Campbell from Nevada, somebody that, again, has experience as sort of the lead guy for his offense and also someone that can go and make plays deep down the field. I think that he is going to be a good fit for Dow Loggins' offense. I think that he is going to make an impact specifically on play action shot plays, essentially where the quarterback fakes handoffs and the receivers are just told to go deep down the field, whether it's a deep crosser, a post route, a go route, you name it. I think that Dalevon Campbell is going to be a good fit in that facet of the offense. Not going to say he's going to do as well as Xavier Legette did this past year in that regard, but I could see Campbell being, a 600-plus receiving yard type of receiver in this offense if he transitions well to this SEC program. So I think that he could certainly help. And I also think that Florida State wide receiver transfer Vandrevius Jacobs, he could also be a huge addition for this receiver room. We'll talk about his skill set a little bit more in a couple moments right here on Locked On Gamecocks. Today's show is brought to you by Monopoly Go. All right, game off. We got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. Flag on the play. You already talked about that. But there's just so much good stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for timed tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much to get on Monopoly Go. You can get unique stickers that you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes. You can also get cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with and hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games, like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and go download it now free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. Welcome back to today's edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, where we cover your team every single day in just 30 minutes. All right, let's talk about Vandrevius Jacobs now, wide receiver transfer from Florida State, who was the first addition that South Carolina got on Tuesday afternoon. Now, with Vandrevius, he doesn't possess the same measurables as Nevada wide receiver Dvan Campbell. Campbell's listed again, about 6'4", a little over 210, 220 pounds. Jacobs, he's listed right at 6 foot, and I want to say 175 pounds based on the roster numbers that Florida State had for last year's football team. So he does not possess the size that Campbell does. However, he plays the same exact way. He is a guy that can go down the field and make contested catches. And there's a couple different things that I saw from his high school tape because he played sparingly as a freshman for the Seminoles this past season. So I went back even further to get a better idea of what he is going to bring to this offense. Positionally speaking, he's got really good spatial awareness. And my point here is this: when he's outside the numbers or he's in the red zone, in the end zone, and he is near the out of bounds area, he knows how to contort his body to get his feet in bounds or a body part in bounds whenever he is going up for a catch. He has very, very good recognition of where he is on the field as it is unfolding. That's obviously something that you probably cannot develop, in all honesty, with wide receivers. That's kind of one of those traits where you've either got it or you don't. Well, Jacobs, he's got it in spades. He also can high point the ball and catch passes over his defender down the field. So again, he can win the jump ball battles against his man. He also is pretty proficient already on fade routes in the red zone. Again, he's 6 foot 175 according to the numbers at Florida State. You would not think that a guy of his size is going to be a big threat on fade routes, but Vandrevius Jacobs, he is that threat on fade routes. He can be used in those route concepts when you're inside the 15 or 10-yard line. So he plays bigger than his size. He's got the body dexterity. He's also deceptively agile, so he can help you out in the screen game as well, or again, maybe on some short crossers over the middle of the field where he's constantly on the move and he has to make some guys miss in the open field. So I think that Jacobs, he could play a lot like an Xavier Legette when he initially got here. You know, again, somebody that can go down the field and make plays, but also somebody that can be a threat in the short to intermediate passing game over the middle of the field. I think in terms of how he can attack defenses like Legette does, Jacobs is probably the most comparable to a Legette than, say, a Dalevon Campbell. So overall, I think that these two additions are big for Shane Beamer and the staff. Again, I'm not going to say that either of these guys are going to do what Xavier Legette did last year. I think what Legette did last year, again, is the exception, not the norm. You're not going to see that very often from a guy, especially someone that's going to their final season of college football. But I think that Vandrevius Jacobs, he can definitely push some of the guys in maybe the first group and second group in that receiver rotation. I think he absolutely can get himself some playing time, depending on how he transitions into this offense over the next few months and into the program in general. I think the guy that's got the best chance to get playing time immediately is a Dalevon Campbell. Now, Shane Beamer, again, he has said several times in the past, he is not a coach that promises a starting job off the rip. I have to imagine, though, that with Campbell only having 1 year of college eligibility remaining, he would not be coming here unless he was given a pretty good idea that, hey, the door is wide open. All you have to do is come over here and just kick the door down. You're going to have your chances. We're going to give you your opportunities. So Dalevon Campbell's going to be the guy to follow, I think, for the most part. But do keep an eye on Vandrevius Jacobs, especially if going throughout the regular season, South Carolina's still struggling in terms of their downfield passing attack, and they need to find some answers there. He could be somebody that gets an opportunity. So these two guys are going to be interesting follows throughout the summer, fall camp, and getting into the start of the 2024 football season. With that being said, that's going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. I hope that y'all thoroughly enjoyed today's show as always. What are your thoughts on Maryam Dauda from Arkansas, the starting center that's in the portal right now. Do you think she'd be a good fit for Dawn Staley and the women's basketball program? And what are your thoughts on Dvan Campbell and Vandrevius Jacobs, the two wide receiver portal additions that Shane Beamer in the football program landed on Tuesday? Let me know all of your thoughts down below in the comment section if you watch today's show on YouTube, or you should be direct message on X at @ALion_SC if you listen to today's show on an audio podcast app. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. Have a great rest of your Wednesday, and I'll be sure to catch y'all on the next show of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast.